Much for allowing me to talk today. It's a real honour to be able to contribute to the event. And so I'm going to talk about how the EPD has contributed to two different interdisciplinary research projects. So the first project is the Change in the Face of the Mediterranean project that was all about how we understand past human land use and environmental change, integrating paleoecology with archaeology. These projects have made particular use of data from the European Pollen Database and really benefited from the work of the palynological community and the open science approach to research that has been quite central to this kind of research. So we've drawn on multidisciplinary data sets and collaborative interdisciplinary approaches to address questions about the drivers of landscape change and the role of people in this process. And the second project I'll talk about is about biodiversity change and land use change in the British Isles. So the Change in the Face of the Mediterranean project was a collaboration between the University of Plymouth and UCL. It's combining archaeology and paleoecology to explore the role of people and the change in population levels in shaping the development of Mediterranean landscapes over millennia. This landscape has been significantly altered and modified by humans over a very long time period. Within this research, we drew upon three different environmental archives: pollen inferred land cover, which is the blue and grey dots on the map, archaeological inferred population, which is the grey areas, which is radiocarbon dated archaeological sites that are used as a proxy for change in human population levels. And we also use settlement site surveys for this archive of changing population. And then the third archive is paleoclimate records from lakes and caves, marine archives, so all non-pollen records. So there are numerous well-established methods for quantifying vegetation from pollen data, particularly the reveals approach. This study doesn't use that methods, but we classify pollen samples using cluster analysis. So in this study, we grouped over 8,000 pollen samples in 200-year time windows based on their similarity to identify clusters of vegetation assemblages. The list is shown on the right there of the slide. And we also use a selection of indicator groups such as cultivated trees and anthropogenic indicators to look at the way that people were using the land through time. This diagram shows the Mediterranean-wide synthesis of pollen data sets. We see a shift towards more open landscape through the Holocene. Early Holocene forest types, such as mesic forest, were replaced by other forest types in the mid to late Holocene, and from around 3000 BP, we see an increase in human indicators and a decline in arboreal pollen, with an increase in anthropogenic pollen indicators and cultivated trees. Modern vegetation is clearly more open and human modified, such as the olive-dominated vegetation clusters. So in the hydroclimate records, we can see that there's no single climate trajectory characterizing the whole of the Mediterranean basin, and this has been quite variable over the last 10,000 years. When we look at regional variation within the Mediterranean, we find that the eastern regions experienced earlier emergence of Neolithic agriculture, and population increase coincide with the increase in cultivated trees and grazing indicators, sometimes during periods of drier climate. We find statistically significant relationships between different human impact indicators and population change, which often becomes more significant into the later Holocene. So Mediterranean landscapes represent a mosaic which reflects distinctive regional historical trajectories that varied spatially. This really highlights the importance of understanding this change at sub-regional scales. Land use impacts are cumulative over time, and the clearest indicators of human activity have been the creation of cultural landscapes based around olive groves and tree crops. And overall, we find that complex regionally variable relationships between land cover and human activity and climate shift over time, and there's a great deal of regional variation. So this was a interesting amalgamation of diverse different data types, and which has allowed us to look at the patterns between climate and people and landscape. So next I'll move on to the second project. This is all about understanding biodiversity change and land use change in the British Isles. The research is collaborative with Historic England and the University of Birmingham, and led from the University of Plymouth. There's project team on the slide there. So it's well known that European biodiversity patterns have been have changed through the Holocene, and humans have played a role in this process. Biodiversity, we're particularly interested in understanding how this has changed over time, because it plays a particularly important role in ecosystem functioning and resilience to global environmental change. Long-term ecological records can allow us to explore biodiversity patterns over multi-millennial timescales, and have also been this has been the focus of various research studies in recent years, and there is really provided a foundation for us to kind of look at what techniques and what understanding already exists, and what can we kind of add to this research, this growing body of research. And so this research that we're carrying out aims to use long-term environmental data sets to reconstruct and explain changing patterns of biodiversity through the Holocene. So we use multidisciplinary environmental archives, fossil pollen to reconstruct land cover and landscape diversity, fossil insects to tell us about faunal diversity change and land cover and certain insect groups as indicators of human land use, plant remains from archaeobotanical data, can tell us about past cultivation and resource use by people. And then we also use dated archaeological sites as an indicator of changing human population sizes. So this map shows the current distribution of data sets used. A large data compilation exercise has been underway for the last couple of years and is now near completion. So there's actually a lot more sites would now be added to this map, but I'm showing the most recent results of analyses. And we will also amalgamating the archaeobotanical data for the next stage. So this figure presents a synthesis of these data sets over the last 10,000 years. Notable increases in population, which are shown by the blue bars, coincide with the loss of forest, which are shown by the green bars. This reveals transformed land cover as the green, pink and white bars. This coincides with an increase in agricultural activity, shown as the cereals and grazing indicators, and changes in insect groups to those associated with human activities and grazing animals. We also find patterns between climate and diversity change through time. Pollen diversity increased most notably as landscapes became more open with early agriculture, and we see a recent decline in landscape evenness, which indicates that vegetation is becoming increasingly dominated by certain types of plants. Now, this really shows that the relationship between population and land cover and diversity is also not straightforward, and understanding the way that people use the land is the missing part of this story at the moment. So this is where the archaeobotanical data will allow us to explore these relationships in more detail. So I'll finish with some key messages. So the EPD has really facilitated this research by providing access to numerous pollen data sets. Through these projects, we've been able to gather additional data sets and contribute these back to the EPD. The EPD and other databases like Neotoma continue to facilitate interdisciplinary research with new knowledge being generated and new collaborations emerging. There've been a lot of recent studies that I keep seeing published, and there's lots of new synergies happening. So it really highlights the value of this community effort and the pivotal role that the scientists driving these open access databases play. So I'll just finish with some acknowledgements. So this work wouldn't be possible without the really important role of people who create and manage these databases, like Eric, and the teams involved in taking and contributing to these data sets as well. Thank you very much.